Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the SERMAPod. This is the podcast for the Sports and Entertainment Risk Management Alliance, SERMA. I'm the founder and CEO of SERMA, Rich Lenkov. I'm also the host of the SERMAPod. And as we enter our second block of 50 SERMAPods in a short period of time, we're really pleased to deal with a very topical topic, that is athletes benefiting from name, image, and likeness deals, and in particular, how that applies to foreign athletes. And our very special guest dealing with that subject, he's been quoted on this subject in many media outlets, including one recent interesting article in USA Today. We've got Gabriel Castro, who's an immigration attorney, focusing in on sports and entertainment at BAL, joining us out of Los Angeles, California this morning. Gabriel, thanks so much for joining us on the SERMAPod.
Thanks, Rich. I'm happy to be here. Happy to discuss this very important topic for foreign student athletes in college sports.
Really appreciate what caught my eye on this story, Gabriel. As a Canadian myself, as a Canadian immigrant to the United States, I am a big fan of Zach Edey. Hopefully, he'll be leading our Canadian Olympic team to a gold medal this summer. This is the best chance we've ever had in medaling in Canadian basketball. We've got an all-star team. Guys like R.J. Barrett and, of course, Zach Edey and, Lou Dort, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Lots of great Canadian basketball players. Actually beat the U.S. team in the games earlier this year. So Zach Edey, hopefully, will be the centerpiece of our team. He's from Canada. He is the reigning NCAA Men's Basketball Player of the Year. He is now a senior at Purdue University. He helped his team get to a number one ranking last year, entering the NCAA tournament. They were upset, of course. They've held the number one seed many times this year, and he's the centerpiece of that. He is the first player. He was the first player last year as a junior in NCAA history to record, let me just make sure I have the right numbers, 750 points, 400 rebounds, 70 blocks, and 50 assists in a single season. I'll tell you, Gabriel, I play basketball too, and we're kind of on opposite ends of the Canadian basketball spectrum, me and Zach. But he's also 7'4", nearly 300 pounds. What's interesting is that, as I mentioned, he decided to forego his senior season, or forego the entry to the NBA draft and stay in school, I should say, and forego what would inevitably be a really lucrative NBA contract. He would have been a top 10 pick, a lottery pick for sure. And he could have made him, millions of dollars in that contract. Instead, he stayed in school, presumably to lead his team to an NCAA championship. Well, that's not such a big trade-off these days, right? As we know in the NFL, lots of players, including, number one pick this year, Caleb Williams, there was some discussion that he would forgo the draft and stay at USC because you can make more money in some respects staying at USC if you're a stud like Caleb Williams and entering the draft. Zach Edey could make some money in an NIL deal and multiple NIL deals, but for the fact that he is a foreign student athlete. Let's pick it up there. Why can't foreigners like the Canadian Zach Edey avail themselves of NIL deals like his American counterparts can?
Rich, that's a great question. And I do want to disclaim here that he can avail himself of NIL deals. It's just very, very specific limitations on how I'm able to do so. And in that USA Today piece, they talked about how in order for him to take on those NIL activities that his domestic counterparts are participating in, he has to leave the country, go back to his home country of Canada, and be able to do active work towards these deals. Now, all this leads back to, of course, the passing of the NIL, or NIL being allowed in college sports. When the NCAA released the statement on this, they had not as many rules as It's very open-ended. It's the Wild West. I've heard many experts speak of it, and it's the same thing for this issue of immigration. And the NCAA's released a statement. They specifically said, and this is okay if it's okay with your immigration status. They didn't really get into detail, and for the record, they really shouldn't. It's not their job to say what is a good and what isn't a good immigration status. And so instead, what you did see, and actually they responded pretty quickly, is that the Department of Homeland Security, the section that is involved with student status, not just for student athletes, but all international students across the United States, they quickly released a statement that says, okay, hey, we see that the NIL is going to change what it means to be a foreign student athlete in the United States, and we're going to release some updates soon on what that will mean for those athletes. That was September 2021, and that was the last time we heard from them on the subject. So right now, we're still left in limbo, and a little bit of background of what that is that, of course, the international student rules and regulations have been around for a very, very long time. A much longer time than the NIL rules are, and in fact, they probably weren't written with the thought process of what it even means to be an international student athlete. They were focused on international students and the international student experience. And because of that, they have very strict limitations on when people can come to the United States as an international student and work for U.S. employers. Now, those limitations, very few exceptions apply, and quickly, us in the immigration field, when we saw NIL come through, we said, "Oh, that counts as work for U.S. immigration. Or that counts for U.S. work for U.S. employers." And so all of a sudden, it's like, "Oh, will they violate their international student status if they take on these NIL deals?" And long story short, in the majority of the cases, if the work is being done in the United States, it would be a violation of their status.
So if Edey in this case signed a deal to sell his jersey or sell his likeness or his autograph or whatever deals are being made at the student athlete level, and he did so physically in the United States, that would be a problem.
Perhaps. So I tend to differentiate between what would be active work and what would be passive work, right? And so the question is there even labor being done, right? It doesn't violate an international student status if you are merely signing a contract or negotiating a contract or any part like that. And so if he's signing his likeness away, if it is just to sell jerseys, he signs a piece of paper, somebody else designs the jersey, he never looks at it again, and he gets a check for it. I see that as passive work. He's not doing any work here. But if part of that NIL deal includes promotional appearances, if it includes signing autographs, shaking hands, if it includes a photo shoot wearing that jersey, that's when it's going to violate his status. He can't accept that deal unless he's going to be doing all of that work outside of the country somewhere where he's legally authorized to do that work.
That's really interesting. So it sounds like it's still a bit of a gray area given how new NILs are and the definition of whether doing that constitutes actual work or passive work. And we'll put that aside for a second. But, the logic, Gabriel, behind these rules are what? That students are granted the right by the U.S. government to come here simply to learn and not to work. And is it that they would be taking jobs away from, similarly situated Americans if they were working? Is that part of the deal?
That is somewhat the thought process. I think what you're really going to start seeing, what the focus really is trying to avoid people taking advantage of the system. That is coming in and sort of nominally attending classes in order to work in the United States. And so the focus really isn't on the international students themselves, but the program being committed to the international students and not allowing it to be abused by others.
I see. And does it matter? Is there only one type of student visa? I know when I came here, I had I think it was a J1 perhaps. Are there different types of student visas, and would the rules apply differently with regards to this type of work?
There are different types of student visas, but the majority of them are very limited and very restricted on how you're going to be able to work outside of your student participation. You are going to see like the J1, where you are allowed to work in certain circumstances, if it's research or working with the university. Similar on the F1 student visa, you're able to work with the university, you're able to work on campus, and you're even able to take on certain training in your academic field. But it's pretty hard to argue that signing autographs, posing for photos is somehow a training and marketing, when really it is essentially part of the sport and not part of the student experience.
So as we talked about earlier, Purdue made a trip for an exhibition game in Toronto, and Edey accompanied them and actually signed a deal during his 2 days there with a company called DAPS to, sell off, I think, some of his merchandise, perhaps. I don't know all the details of the deal, but that did not violate any of the rules you're talking about because he was outside of Canada. Is that true? I mean, outside of
the United States. Yes, no, absolutely. And that is the key, right? He's not barred. U.S. immigration law cannot restrict work done outside of the country. It is specific to what's going on here. And especially if you're Canadian, it's actually very convenient. You can go right over to Canada, get that work done because you have work authorization as a Canadian citizen in your home country. Is it so simple for the Australian players that were playing women's basketball at Nebraska? Absolutely not. Is it as simple for the players that need to go home to Africa for that work authorization? There's a lot of complications here, and Zach Edey is actually in a very good situation in the sense that not only can he cross the border, I mean, Indiana is right there. We're pretty close to Canada, but also he's making a fair bit of money in the NIL space. He's estimated to be making almost $1 million this year alone in NIL deals, and that allows him. I mean, in that situation, he was traveling with the team, but it wouldn't really be that much for him to take some of that NIL money and put it into a place where he can go and accept the money, fly to Canada. But that's not true for all athletes and for all foreign student athletes. Many of them aren't making upwards of $1 million. Instead, they're passing on like what you'll see for many teams where it's just a couple thousand, maybe 10, 20,000, whatever. But it's not enough to where a flight home really makes sense to accept this money to make this deal happen. And they're going to have to pass on the same deals that are being offered to their domestic student counterparts, just because there's no practical way they can make it happen.
Gabriel, if you look around the professional leagues these days, particularly let's talk about the NBA, where Zach Edey will be in a few months, you're looking at some of the best players in the world, certainly some of the top 6 or 7 in the MVP race in the NBA this year, guys like Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who I mentioned, Luka Doncic, who scored the fourth, fourth highest total in NBA history a few days ago, 73 points. You're seeing players who were born outside of the U.S. In light of that, and the fact that I think I saw the statistic being that nearly 13% of all athletes in D1 are international, including 17% who play basketball, right? We've seen expansion all over the world, particularly in Africa. Lots of great players these days coming out of Africa. Do you think the NCAA will have to adapt their rules to accommodate this expansion we're seeing internationally?
So this is something that's wonderful about the sporting field here in the United States, is that we in a lot of ways bring the best product in certain sports to the world. The NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, these are the highest it can get. You're seeing it at NCAA as it's the next level there, and players from around the world want to be here. And I think as a country, we don't want to disincentivize players from playing in the United States. We want to welcome them here. We want the best possible product, both in the NBA, but also here in the NCAA as well. I'm sure you're aware that the leagues in Europe, where we've seen international players get their start before moving to the NBA, that'd be very, very tempting for many of these players, to where they could go and they could play for the Barcelona basketball team or Real Madrid, and get paid to do that, or they could come here, attend a university for 1 or 2 years, but be limited because of this F1 process, to not be able to accept money to do so. They might be choosing Europe the next time instead of choosing the United States. And I think we should have a system that encourages them to be here and encourages universities to welcome them. And I think you bring up the NCAA. I think the NCAA, it's not really their place to make these changes. We have to look to U.S. immigration agencies, particularly the Department of Homeland Security, to provide additional guidance. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but me and a colleague of mine this last spring actually gathered universities from around the country, members from their compliance department, from the SEC, from the Big Ten, some of the biggest athletic programs in the country, just to talk about this issue. What were they seeing? What's going on? And the one thing all of them could agree upon is they just want clarity. They're operating in a system where they have to look at what other universities are doing and hoping that they're the same, but also trying to talk with their immigration counsel and figure out what to do based off of that. But because there's no clarity, because there's no real enforcement of what's going on, right? They're hearing from their players, hey, I could get in Nebraska, they're allowing me to take this deal, or hey, at the University of Washington, I could accept this money, so why can't I do it here? I'm going to leave and go to some university where I can't. And you're going to see, universities compete with each other in an area that's supposed to be compliance, right? They're supposed to be finding ways to follow the rules, and if anything, they're encouraged now to take more risks in order to keep those players and have them competing for the next season.
Gabriel, to that point, and speaking of the need for uniformity, in October, there was a bipartisan bill by the senator from Nebraska, Pete Ricketts, and Richard Blumenthal out of Connecticut, Democrat, to amend immigration laws to allow international students to have NIL deals in the U.S. There's also another piece of legislation that was a wider bill in the House and Senate addressing these laws. Do you think that those stand a chance of success and are a means to remedy some of the inequities and different applications of these laws that you've talked about?
Generally, I'm an optimist by nature, and I see hope in these bills. I see that there's an opportunity for bipartisanship, especially when college basketball does play a big factor into changing these rules for NIL, foreign student athletes. So you'll see certain states in play like Indiana, Kentucky, that are definitely going to join into this. But the further reaches of this, I mean, NIL is not limited to just basketball, or foreign student athletes don't only play college basketball. You're seeing a growing number of them in college football, of course, baseball, track and field. They're all over these sports, and so you'll see major athletic programs and push their state representative. That being said, Rich, I practice immigration. I've learned not to get my hopes up about congressional change in our field. I know that I'd love to see it. I'd hope to see it, but when it comes to immigration, I think no matter what the bill is or the support and whatever field it affects, I think it's an uphill battle when it comes to DC. And I hope I'm wrong, but I wouldn't get my hopes up about any bill in the House or the Senate.
Immigration attorney Gabriel Castro of BAL. He's a senior associate, heads up the LA office. The website is bal.com. Gabriel, thank you so much for joining us on the SERMAPod, and please come back and update us on this very interesting issue as it progresses.
Absolutely, Rich. Thanks for having me.